Hey everyone, Connie here, and welcome to my review for part 3 of the Fear Street movie trilogy, 1666. Or, well, mostly. See, it's mostly 1666, but then, the later, just under half of it or so, is back to the original story in 1994 because, that's the main story going on that all three of these films are connected to. Um, And with this film, unlike the first two, I'm not as big of a fan of it. The first one was definitely the best. And it seems like each one is less and less good after that. Not that they're bad, none of them are actually bad, but this third one especially has some notable issues for me personally. If they don't affect other people, that's fine, but they're definitely issues for me. So this continues right where the second movie left off, and that was Dina being given the vision of 1666 and what happened with Seraphir. Like at the very end of the last movie, it kind of started that very briefly, and at this one, we get to actually see the vision. So going forward, I will be talking about spoilers. So just letting you know, there will be spoilers for Fear Street 1666, and possibly the other two movies as well. In fact, at least most likely the first one and part of the second one. There will be spoilers for the Fear Street movies, and we'll start that in three, two, one, now. So, yeah, 1666, as we see, is where Sarah Fear was this young girl, this just normal everyday pilgrim girl, um, just settling this small town of Union with her father, her brother, and friends. Um, we see that her and her friends get up to trouble at night, like going into the woods to drink and party and stuff, but nothing altogether too terrible or anything. And we see that there is this girl that Seraphir liked named Hannah, I believe it was, and she's the pastor's daughter. And here's where my issues start to really come in. I don't like the decision that they made to have all of the characters in 1666 be portrayed by the same actors as in the other two movies. I understand that Seraphir is trying to show Dina the the past to show her the events of what happened, and this is Dina like witnessing these events, but that actually makes it even more confusing. If Seraphir is showing Dina these events in 1994, why is Dina seeing it through the lens of her and her friends and family and other people of Shadyside as these people in 1666? That honestly makes no sense. And it's honestly very distracting too, because it's like you're supposed to see like this girl as Sarah Fear, but at least for me, all I see is Dina. I just see her as Dina, and it makes it worse when her character is basically just Dina. I really don't like the decision that they made to basically make the 1666 story just a copy of the 1994 story. It's basically the same, even down to the fact that Seraphir has a crush on another girl. They have to keep it secret, and once it's found out, bad shit starts happening. It's like, yeah, the very specific stuff is different, but it's so blatantly the same kind of thing. And maybe they were trying to go for like, oh, this, so Dina's going to connect with Seraphir through this. It's going to be her way of like relating to her and stuff, but it just comes across as lazy. It just feels like a stupid idea. And it's like I'm not even like against the idea of Seraphir being shown to be queer or anything. It's just the fact that it's basically a rehash of the 1994 storyline, down to the fact that again it's the same actors playing it. It just I don't like that. Um, I really don't like that. And we see actors from both of the first two movies in here too. So like there's a character who's played by Sadie Sink in here from the part 2 movie. There's characters like I said like Dina and whatnot who their actors are in this movie as well. And it's like it's a combination of that. And it's still though, I think it just feels wrong to do that. Especially because there's glimpses, like there's these short little glimpses of like what Seraphir actually looked like, and it's like, oh, okay, why couldn't you have this actress just do it the entire time? If Seraphir is showing Dina this vision, it makes no sense for this to be seen, for Dina to be seen this like through the lens of again her and her family and her friends and the people Shady Side in general. It makes no sense, and it's just it really just weakens it, along with the entire thing about just being a rehash of the 94 storyline. But on top of that, the other parts of 1666 that are weaker is it's boring. It's honestly just not as interesting as the first two movies. Um, and honestly, um, I'm not really as invested. The gore is also very heavily toned down compared to the first two. And it seems like each one got less and less interesting in terms of their portrayal of the violence and gore. Um, but this one definitely tones it down. It almost feels like it's barely there. Even like this one scene, like where you see the moment when Sarah Fear gets her hand taken off. It's like even that is so just uneventful in its depiction. And I know that part of this might be because of like maybe COVID messed with with things quite a bit. Um, I know it definitely messed with the releasing of this because the first movie was originally supposed to come out in theaters, which meant the second and third probably were going to as well. But then they ended up just coming straight to Netflix because of COVID messing everything up. So I'm wondering if it might have messed up their ability to like once they started working on this movie more and more to just amp up the gore. Because if that was intentional, that it was just going to be just less intense like that, I don't know. It just seems not as good. And I'm not saying that it has to have gore to be good or intense, but it's like honestly, the gore and the intense scares were a part of the first two films that made them good. And this one just takes that away. There's one moment the besides the hand thing that is like that gets almost close, but just shies away just enough. And there's some moments that are obviously a little disturbing in the context of what's happening, but nothing ever goes far enough. For example, there's this one part where it like shows um, that this mother pig had eaten her newborn offspring, and it's like it's part of the curse and everything that's going on. But it's also it barely shows it, and it just doesn't seem that impressive for what they're showing and all. And then there's this part where like all the kids of Union, this small pilgrim town, all the children are kidnapped by the possessed pastor who pulls out all of their eyes and kills them and all. And you see their corpses sitting in the pews of the church with the eyes poked out and all, and it's like it just feels like it's very blah in terms of the effects on that and all. Um, and like I said, it's honestly boring. The only good thing about it is finding out the truth, which leads into the second half of this movie, which goes back to '94. Um, that's really the only good thing about the 1666 storyline is that you learn the truth of Sarah Fear and what happened. So we learn that Sarah Fear was completely innocent, which we already kind of figured, um, and that she was accused of being a witch simply because the people of Union needed someone to accuse when everything started going wrong. They had no evidence. There was absolutely nothing to put them as the bad guys, except for the fact that you know Sarah and Hannah were secretly a thing. They were seen by a couple people very briefly, and that was used against them because, ooh, that's against God and shit. And it's like, well, I'm not even going to get into that whole bullshit claim here, but they use that. Um, the town uses that to like say that they've consorted with the devil and shit, and it's ridiculous. Um, but they're accused of being the witches. While Hannah is caught, Sarah manages to escape, and the town is searching for her. She meets with this the trying to think of the word, the ancestor, the ancestor of the '94 character Sheriff Good, who was also in the second movie as well. Um, the ancestor Solomon Good, who is just this kind of he's just kind of living outside the town. He's doing his own thing, trying to farm this land, and he's actually good friends with Sarah Fear. So she ends up going to him, but it's soon revealed that he's the real bad guy, and that he had taken this book, the devil's book, basically, that we had seen before, from this woman called the widow, who's like this creepy lady living out on her own as well. He took it, he killed the widow, he made a deal with the devil, basically for power. And the idea was to just make one sacrifice every generation. His sacrifice was the possession of the pastor, in which the kids were all killed. And I guess the rest of the shit that was happening in Union too, like the pig eating its young, all the fruit and food going bad, that kind of stuff, I guess was part of it too. But yeah, we find out that he was the true bad guy all along. Um, and eventually he is the one who cuts off Sarah's hand, though reluctantly. And also reluctantly, he does give Sarah up, and we see Sarah hang. But before she does take all of the blame upon herself, saying that she consorted with the devil and everything, and she had bewitched Hannah. So Hannah gets away. Hannah is able to survive because of Sarah's selflessness. But through this, we find out like the truth. And we find out that it didn't just end at Solomon Good back in 1666, that every generation, every first son after that, in every generation of the Good family, has kept this going. Each one has continued the deal with the devil and has continued to just make these sacrifices and place these names. That's why you see all the names on the stone in the previous movie and all. All these names were put by all the different generations of the Good family, leading to our current Good police officer, police chief Nick Good. And we find out that the sheriff, um, back in the second movie storyline, he was the one who started all of that too. We find that out as well. So he was a bad guy the entire time in part two, and I actually think that's pretty good. That's pretty cool. So we go back to the '94 storyline, and now Dina, her brother, um, C. Berman, and this guy we saw in part one. I can't think of his name right now, but this guy who was in the jail with them briefly in part one. He comes back and he gets the help as well, and they put together this elaborate plan in the mall um, to stop the resurrected killers that uh, who we now know is Sheriff Good is sending out after them instead of Sarah Fear. And so they work on a plan to stop them in their tracks, but also to lure Sheriff Good himself there. They enacted some hijinks ensue, but it's a really fun series of scenes. It's really interesting. And eventually it comes down to Dina chasing down Sheriff Good in the caves underneath the town, underneath the mall, starting underneath the mall and going throughout the town. Um, she's chasing him, and eventually she's caught up to by Sam, her girlfriend who was tied up before because she had become possessed. And she manages to stop Sam by getting her to recognize her, and she knocks her out. And then she goes after Sheriff Good. She has a brief fight with him, gets him to touch this. I still don't know what it is. It's in the caves. It was shown in part two as well. It's like this lump of flesh almost. And it's really creepy. Um, but she gets him to touch it, and Sarah Fear takes control and starts showing him all these visions of all these people that died because of his family and everything, because of the goods. And it ends with Dina stabbing him in the eye and killing him. And so everything at that point ends. Like we see all the resurrected killers disappear. We see the lump of flesh thing disappear. Everything just all the etchings and stuff that were created by Solomon Good back in 1666 goes away. Everything is done. Um, and yeah, at this point, it's just kind of like epilogue stuff, closing everything out. Everything works out for our heroes, that kind of stuff. It's found out, like Sheriff Good being a bad guy is made public, though obviously the specifics aren't. Um, and everything just kind of works out. But then there's a post-credit scene where it shows someone taking the witch's book, uh, the book that started all of this, the book that the original Solomon Good used to create the deal with the devil. We don't know who it was that took the book. There's really no evidence of who it could be. So, yeah, we just kind of go from there. And that is how it ends. Like I said, the going back to 1994, it even says in the movie 1994 part 2. So it's like the continuation of that entire storyline. When they go back to that, it's great. All of that stuff is fantastic. But the 1666 stuff was not. It was not really that great at all. It wasn't outright terrible, it wasn't outright bad, but it just had so many issues that I just can't overlook. Um, if it's not as much of an issue to other viewers or whatnot, that's fine. It's all perspective, so that's completely normal, really. But for me, it was way too much of an issue. It was way too distracting, and it just hurt my overall enjoyment of it. So uh, that ends my reviews for this trilogy, though, and it does bring up what I would like to see next if they continue this, which I think they've said they want to. If they do more Fear Street movies, I am hoping that they do another trilogy and I hope that they do the Cheerleaders trilogy because those are the books of the Fear Street books by R.L. Stein that I grew up with the most. Um, I read them more than the other Fear Street books, and I want to see those adapted for sure. They're even shown at points in the first and third movie. Like it shows the actual Fear Street books at points, and it's kind of funny because of that. But some of the books shown are the cheerleaders, and there's three of them. There's the first evil, the second evil, and the final evil. And those are the ones that I really would love to see adapted because again, I grew up with those, and I would love to see just how they handle the scene where one of the girls gets scalded alive in a shower and killed that way, and because that was horrific to read when I was in high school. So I would love to see how horrific they could make that. Sounds kind of morbid, but it would be interesting to see just from a viewing perspective. Um, so I hope that they do end up making a trilogy for the cheerleaders, like they did for this. I guess you could say main story. Um, but to end things off, I would say my biggest positive for this trilogy, just to completely um, counterbalance from the fact that the 1666 portion was my biggest negative. My biggest positive is I really like how they handled the queer representation in this. And that goes for the entire trilogy. Dina and Sam are exceptionally cute together. Their relationship is believable, and you just instantly just latch onto it, and you really want to see everything resolved in the end, and it is. Um, Sarah Fear and Hannah, not as much because it just feels like a retread of the exact same thing. But that's more of an issue with the 1666 storyline than with the actual relationship itself. Um, but I like that this didn't go in a direction to where one of the two girls ends up dying or anything. I like that it didn't just like try to push it aside or make it just this minor thing that was like not brought up too often. Like it was a driving force of this trilogy. Dina and Sam's relationship was important to this trilogy. And in the end, it survived. They survived, and their relationship thrived following it. And that is what I like to see. I mean, I'm one of those people who actually is good with all kinds of representation because I like to see um, realistic depictions, not just a fantasy of like only the positive. But I do love to see the positive, and this was definitely a great example of that. And it really embraced that aspect of this story. It really embraced their queerness and just kept it as a major factoring part of this story that it was actually excessively important. So, yeah, I loved it. I very much enjoyed it. And as for the trilogy, overall, very good. Has some issues for sure, but overall, very good. And I definitely want to see more of this kind of stuff from Netflix. So tell me your thoughts on Fear Street Part 3, 1666, and just the entire trilogy as a whole down in the comments below. And thank you so much for tuning in. For now, I'm Connie and I'm signing off. See y'all next time.